Dedication, a devoting or setting aside for a particular purpose. Ruth 1:16-17. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. Alright, you guys, welcome back once again. It's your girl Jasmine. So today we're going to be talking about restoration when it comes to a dedication. Now, we've talked about restoration when it comes to brokenness and realizing that you're broken and that you need change. And then we talked about restoration when it comes to letting something go, because in order to move forward, you have to let some things go. So now we're talking about restoration and dedication. Now, I know all about this because, I kid you not, this is probably the first time that I've had to record an intro like 10 times. So I know that being dedicated to something and making sure that the people, in my life that God, would want to hear what he has to say, I have to continue to be dedicated to what it is that God has called me to do, no matter how many times I mess up, how many times, my words don't come out right, how many times, things don't go the way I want them. In our lives, no matter what happens, no matter how many times you fall, you have to keep getting up. You have to keep pressing forward. No matter how many times, like I said, you mess up, you can always get back up, always continue on, always pressing forward towards what it is that God has for you. So I'm going to be reading a few scriptures out of Ruth, and then I'm going to be in Exodus. So I encourage you guys to stay tuned towards the lesson. All right, you guys, God bless. Peace. Alright, you guys, so usually, we are in the book of Ruth because we're talking about restoration, but I'm actually going to start off in Exodus today. So basically, we're going to be in Exodus, different verses. I'm going to kind of break it up, so I'm going to be all over the place, so I'm just going to tell you the scriptures as I go along. So I'm going to be in Exodus chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, and it says, And after Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice, to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And then I'm going to skip over to verse 22 and 23, and it says, And Moses returned unto the Lord and said, Lord, wherefore hast thou so evil entreated this people? Why is it that thou hast sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in thy name, he hath done evil to this people, neither hast thou delivered thy people at all. Now, if you guys know the story of Moses, Moses was he was chosen from birth. He lived in the kingdom of Pharaoh. He murdered a man, ran off into the desert, was gone for years and years, was a free man, living free, and then God called him to go help set people free. Moses, here we see that God sent Aaron and Moses to go approach the Pharaoh, to tell the Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, because God had made a covenant promise between Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying that the land of Canaan was there and that they could dwell there. And, the children of Israel ended up coming into Egypt when Joseph was reigning underneath the Pharaoh. And so they've been in bondage for, some time now. And now God heard their cries and was trying to set them free. So he sent Moses to go deliver them. And the Pharaoh, Moses went to go confront the Pharaoh, and, he says, and after Moses and Aaron went and told the Pharaoh that thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may hold, and then the Pharaoh, he said no. So when we are going to be when we go to become dedicated into what it is that God has called us to do, we have to know that it is going to come with a struggle. There's going to be a fight for what it is that God wants to do in your life. Anytime that, you're trying to dedicate yourself to something, try to, put your whole heart and your whole soul on it, things, you can get a little bit discouraged because as soon as you go to do it, there is some resistance. Because the Pharaoh, he said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go." There was resistance there. He was like, I am not letting them go, And so Moses had to choose, to be, dedicated to what he was going to do, because right here was his first time approaching Pharaoh, and right the first time that he went to go approach Pharaoh to allow the children of Israel to go, Pharaoh was like, no way, and Moses, I remember when I first left school, and I was, going to leave school, and, it just seemed crazy because, like, I'm like, I know I'm hearing God's voice, I'm not crazy, and, things just didn't seem like the way that I planned them. I thought, oh, everybody's gonna be on my side, and, this is what God has called me to do, and everybody's gonna, all the doors are just gonna be open, and everybody's gonna be like, oh, yay, Jasmine's gonna do this, for God, and that's not the case. We look at Moses, and here Moses is, and he's thinking, okay, God told me to go to Pharaoh and, and to ask for the children of Israel, for him to free them. And it wasn't the case. He went up to him, Moses probably thought, oh, okay, it's going to be pretty easy, it's quite easy, yeah. All right, he's just going to let them go. I'm going to be able to go to the wilderness with my people. And yeah, but that's not what happened. And see, he was committed. Moses was committed to the task of, doing what God had called him to do. But the thing was, Pharaoh didn't want to let them go. So then we see Moses again, and Moses, going to God, like, because what ends up happening is Pharaoh, puts more burdens on the children of Israel. And so the children of Israel, they're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And, Moses is like, he returns to God, and he's like, well, Lord, what are you doing? Like, it says right here, and Moses returned to the Lord and said, wherefore thou so evil and treated this people? Why is it that thou hast sent me? Like, he was questioning, like, God, why have you sent me? Here he was, a free man, and you're sending me to get all these people out of bondage, and it says, for since I came to came to Pharaoh to speak in thy name, he hath done evil to this people, neither has thou delivered thy people at all. So he was thinking that, God was just going to, as soon as he went, that, the people were going to be delivered. And that's not always the case. Like, when we think about, when we're going to spread the gospel to Jesus Christ, of Jesus Christ, all over, and we go to preach to people, and we go tell people about Jesus, people don't always get delivered right away. They don't always get saved right away. We have to keep, going back and showing the love of Christ, and showing God's love, and letting them know that Jesus loves them, and, continually, because if not, they will not get delivered. They will be stuck in the world. And here, Egypt represents the world. They'll be still stuck in bondage. So we have to make sure that we continually go back to, because if not, they will be delivered. But sometimes, when we're continually doing something for God, to be restored, to be delivered, God was trying to restore this people to their original land, to the promised land, to the land of Canaan. And they could not get there if they were still in bondage. And so Moses, being a free man, could have, had his own family, had his own wife, was living in, this, the desert with his family. And, And, he could have just stayed there. But no, he went to go set people who were in bondage free, to do the will of God. But he's just like, God, since I've gone to do this, they're not even free at all, And so Moses had to choose, because right here is the point in time, a lot of the time when we get rejected, we get shut down, and we, go to do what God has called us to do. The first time that we get rejected, that commitment, that dedication no longer, plays a part in what we think we should do. Because after we get rejected, a lot of people, after they get rejected and shut down, they stop fighting for what it is that their goal is, what it was that they were pushing for in the first place. They don't go back just to, and we'll see later that Moses gets rejected more than once. And the thing is, we could be rejected more than once, but we have to remember that we have to stay dedicated to the task in which God has called us to be. So, I'm going to put up the next few questions, and then we're going to carry on. Are you guys? Define commitment and resistance. Questions. What has God asked you to do that you have been committed to? How has that commitment changed your life? Since being committed to the task God has for you, have you suffered rejection, thinking the task would be easier since God sent you? Do you go to God like Moses did and question what he is doing because of the rejection? Alright, guys, so, whenever there is, bondage being involved with God wanting to restore people and, someone being dedicated to, we look at Moses. Moses was free, and Moses was trying to help get other people out of bondage. And whenever we go to help other people to, get out of bondage, there's always going to be some type of resistance, even from the people. We look in verse 9 of chapter 6 of Exodus. It says, And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses for anguish of the spirit and for cruel bondage. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Go in, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he let the children of Israel go out of this land. And Moses spake before the Lord, saying, Behold, the children of Israel have not hearkened unto me. How then shall Pharaoh hear me, who am of uncircumcised lips? So here Moses is in even the children of, so it gets a little trickier, because you're like, okay, God, I want to be dedicated to your will. So first, Pharaoh's not even, Pharaoh's resisting him. Then the people that he's trying to get out of bondage are resisting him. You get to a point where it's just like, okay, God, every place I go, even the people that I'm trying to help are resisting the help, So it gets really hard, because, how can you help people who don't want to be helped, I said, we were talking about, people who are dedicated have to be willing to go, willing to do what God has called them to do. But here the children of Israel, they're in bondage, they're, enslaved in bondage, and they are not, they're resisting. They're resisting what it is that God is trying to do in their life, instead of, pushing forward. And that happens a lot of time in our lives. The people that we're trying to help get out of bondage, get out of, wherever place it is in their life, if they're stuck in a place that's not good for them, what happens is, they resist your help. They don't want it. But it's not like they're doing any better for themselves because they're in bondage. But, God didn't care about, what the circumstances look like. It didn't matter what the circumstances looked like. It didn't, even if everything seemed to be against him, it did not matter. If everything is against you, it does not matter. The Bible says in Romans 8:31, that, basically, what shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who could be against us? Like, here he is. God is for him all the way in his journey, in his walk, in his battles. There is nothing that, anybody can do or say, because this battle and, trying to get these people out of bondage, this dedication, towards what it was that he was doing, here he is, like a man, against, like, it seems like his back is against the wall. What is he gonna do? The people he's trying to help, get out of bondage, want to resist him. The Pharaoh won't let everything go. It just feels like everything that you do to try to become dedicated, nobody wants to help you. All Moses had was God and Aaron. Aaron was there. Aaron knew what God was calling them to do, and it gets kind of hard, because it's just like, okay, well, God, I just look crazy. Like, here I am trying to get these people out of bondage, and everybody is against me. Everybody's against me on everything I'm doing, and it can get to a point where you just feel like, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? God put me on this task, and it just seems like everything surrounding me is just against me, and I can't win. There's no winning. But you have to make sure, know that, if God is for you, then who can be against you? Because even if you look crazy to society and you keep pressing forward and being dedicated to what it is that God called you to do, you know that it's okay, because God's on your side, because God is for you. God is for you, and he's for the task that he put you up to. So, you're not looking crazy, but you have to continue to be pressing forward, because obviously God is not going to tell you to do something if he doesn't know the outcome, if he doesn't know what is going to happen, if you continue to do what he has called you to do. Despite the rejection, despite, people not willing to, want to receive the help to get out of bondage, he still has this task for you, and you have to continue going back. Moses told God, that he was a man of unclean lips, that no one would, heed to him, no one would listen to him. In Isaiah 6, verse 1 through 8, I want to turn you guys there to Isaiah 6, 1 through 8. This is kind of like when Isaiah was, going to become a prophet. Isaiah was going to become a prophet, and basically, he was telling God, I'm a man of unclean lips. Now, we can be rejected, and we can, make up all the excuses of why we can't go back. Nobody's listening to us. I tried Pharaoh. He doesn't want to listen to me. I tried the children of Israel. They don't want to listen to me, but God doesn't want to hear that. So, here we are in verse 6:1, and this is what I'm, this says it all. He just wants that person who is willing and able to do what he has called them to do. In Isaiah 6 chapter verse 1 through 8, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, and with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell amongst the midst of a people of unclean lips. For thine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew in one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken from the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth, and said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin is purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. So here is, Isaiah, and, he is a man. He's saying, he's about to be called to be a prophet. And he's like, look, I am a man of unclean lips. And, how am I going to do this? I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. But, here it is, it says, one of the seraphims flew into, with a live coal and touched his lips. God gave him the, anointing to be able to go and prophesy to the people and do the calling in which he had. God gave Moses everything that he needed for the task in which he brought him to. All he needed to be was just like Isaiah. God had said to him, it says, also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And all God needed was, here am I, Lord, send me. Send me. That's when we're dedicated, we have to go with the attitude with send me. Send me through whatever it is that I'm going through. Send me, whatever I have to face, whatever struggles are up there. You have to keep fighting and going through whatever it is that you're going through, no matter what circumstances you have to go through. We look at Paul and, Paul in the Bible, and he says, I've learned how to be abound in the base, through all the different circumstances, and, no matter what, whether you're up, whether you're down, whether God has you in one place, whether God has you in another place, whatever place you're in your life, you have to be willing to do the task that God has has put in your face. You can't move to the next place in which God needs you to move to, unless you have, done what you need to do. What was Moses supposed to do? Sit there and be like, oh, well, it's all right. I'm just going to go back home in the desert with my family and be free while these people suffer. And God told me that they can be free and dwell in the wilderness and, and worship me in the wilderness, Moses had to keep being dedicated to what it is. He had, had to have the attitude of like, okay, Lord, here, send me. I'm going to keep pressing on. I'm going to keep being dedicated to what it is that you have called me to do. So I'm going to put up the next questions and we're going to carry on. Are you guys? Since you have been rejected, are you giving God excuses on why you can't go back? Why? Or are you telling God, here am I, send me? Do you think the task would be harder if God wasn't on your side to coach you to not give up? Alright, you guys. So basically what happens is God ends up sending several plagues. And finally, Pharaoh's heart was hardened and would not let the children of Israel go. So finally, God told the children of Israel to put the blood of a lamb over their doors so that he could pass over them because he was the firstborn child. Something was going to happen. And basically what happened was all the firstborn children of all those people who did not have the blood over the door would pass away. And so here we are in Exodus chapter 12. Verse 29, and it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborns in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose up in the night, and he and all the servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord, as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. So basically the Pharaoh finally gives up and gives in and was like, look, you can be free, get out of the land of Egypt, take your people, go serve your God, just get out. I am sick and tired of everything that's going on. So after a while of sitting there and fighting and being very determined and dedicated to what it is that God has set you out to do, finally Pharaoh, people don't ever really want to give in until something really bad happens. Pharaoh because of Pharaoh's decision, affected all the other people in the land of Egypt. It also, and then finally, he lost his firstborn children. So, of course, there was a great cry in Egypt. He was affecting those around him. Sometimes because people, don't want to get out of bondage, or, they don't want to let other people go. Here it is. Pharaoh is making the decision not to let someone else, get out of bondage. And because of it, it's affecting those around him because of his own selfish needs. And sometimes people, when they are very selfish and only care about themselves and what's going to help build up, their kingdom and their life and their stuff, and God is trying to do a work, and try to change lives, and it's affecting what God is trying to do, because of their anger and their bitterness and their hard-heartedness. It really affects other people's lives, and so all the firstborn children finally were, killed, and there was a great cry in Egypt, and it was very sad. But Pharaoh finally let the children of Israel go in the wilderness. A lot of things can be avoided in life if we just decide to surrender and let go, and just do the things in which God has called us to do in our lives, And sometimes, people will try to block what God's trying to do in your life and other people's lives around you because they don't agree with what it is that God's doing. Pharaoh didn't agree with Moses. He was just like, no, I'm sorry. But, when God has a plan for your life, there's no stopping it. God's going to continue pursuing until, he can pursue no more. God has a will and a plan for our lives, and his will and his plan has to be done, and he's determined to get his will across, and so so we're gonna turn over to Exodus 14. But what happens is the enemy also plays tricks, just because Pharaoh let him go. When they went to go cross the Red Sea, Pharaoh decided to continue on pursuing the children of Israel, and so it says right here in chapter 14 verse 21, and Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. So here we see that Pharaoh, once he let, the children of Israel go, he was just like, you know what? No, he didn't learn his lesson. He didn't learn the lesson of what, it was that God was trying to show him. Look, I'm in control. You think because you're Pharaoh and that you're big bad and, you think you're in control, you're not in control. And so Pharaoh, still after all that stuff had happened, he didn't want to believe that, there was a God bigger than him. And so he sent the Egyptians to pursue the children of Israel, but God was determined to get the children of Israel free. There was no doubt about it. And it says, and it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. So God, like we see how the plagues came, once God had told Moses, to do what he had called them to do, when the Egyptians were, acting out against Moses, God decided to fight for Moses. God decided and for the children of Israel, he sent the plagues. Just like right here, God was determined to do, after a while, God is going to just fight your battle because, we are human beings, and, Moses wasn't fighting this battle alone. We look at people like David. David went up against Goliath, his giant in life, and, he didn't fight his battle alone. He just stood there, he slung his sling, and in faith, he trusted God. And so, God will take control of the situation, because after a while, people think, it's kind of like just sitting there and you're the vessel and God is like, those pictures where you'll see like a person and then you'll see like a bigger person standing right in front of them. It's kind of like a small person and like a big bodyguard type person. It's kind of like that. Like here you are, like, all, maybe humble and quiet and sensitive, or you just been sitting there like, okay, God, and then all of a sudden you have like this big bodyguard type person behind you. I'm God, and I'm here to fight your battles. That's what you have to remember. God is so large and so great and so mighty, and he's standing right behind you fighting your battle. You just have to be there. You think about people like Gideon in the Bible. All he had to do was stand there and, and trust in God, and they end up winning the battle. So, here it is, in verse 25, and they took off their chariot wheels and they took off their chariot wheels and they drave from their heavenly. So the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. So, it's like they were still dedicated too. They were dedicated into fighting against God. And, Moses and God was fighting for Moses, basically. And it says, and the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, and the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched out forth his hands over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came unto the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. And the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them, and on their right hand and on their left. And the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw the great works in which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. So after all that dedication, and to the will of God and what God wanted for Moses' life, Moses saw results. They were free from bondage. They were free from Egypt, the world. He just continued to press on forward when he could have turned back, when Pharaoh kept denying him, even through the plagues. Pharaoh kept being like, no, I'm not going to let your people go. Even after, Pharaoh let them go and then tried to pursue them, he could have turned back and been like, okay, my people are going to go back into bondage. But he kept pressing forward, and God, it says, and Israel saw the great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant. The people were free, and it's like a beautiful thing, because when we are to determine and do what it is that God has called us to do, when we're dedicated to the will of God, we will see great results, especially when God's in it. So we have to continue pressing forward and being dedicated to what it is that God has called us to do. And when we're being restored, God was taking the children of Israel to the promised land, was bringing them to a place flowing with milk and honey. He wanted to take them out of bondage to a place where they could live in peace and have, a place with love and care, and it's flowing milk and honey. Yeah, there may be battles, yeah, there may be ups and downs, but he wanted to take them to a place in which he had promised them. And that's how God is. God, this is this world right now, and we have to be dedicated to what it is that God has called us to do in this life, because one day, God is promising us, a home in heaven, and that, if we continue to be dedicated through the rejection, dedicated through the ups, dedicated through the downs, whatever it is that we're going through in life, God will, you know, come through and do what he has promised. He promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, and they couldn't get there unless, they continue to be dedicated and keep running the race in which was laid before them, and when you think about, being restored, you think about, being dedicated to what it is that God has called you to do, because I mean, in life, anything that requires dedication, you have to continue putting forth the effort. Things fail because we stop being dedicated to what it is that we're doing. But if we continue pushing forward, even when things are bad, even when things are hard, even when things never, it seems like, it's not letting up, it seems like, you just keep pressing forward, you keep trying to get things to become better, and no matter how much you try to, get them to be better, they just seem to get worse and worse and worse, and sometimes, we know that it can get a toll on you and on yourself, and you can become discouraged and, just very tired and just want to give up, and just feel like there's no hope out there. But, what God has promised, God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, and what God has promised, it is not a lie. God is not one who shall lie. From the beginning of the Bible, he promised Jesus Christ, and then Christ came. He promised a person to restore the fall, for what Adam and Eve did, and he sent his only begotten son, to die on the cross for our sins, and if God says that he's going to restore you, you just have to continue to be dedicated to the work of God in which he has called you to do. And so I'm going to put up the next few questions and we're going to carry on. All right, guys. Peace. Has God had you stay dedicated to the task, no matter how many people try to stop you? What is that task? Does your situation think it is bigger than God? Or do you have faith to believe God is bigger than your situation? Have you continued pushing forward to be dedicated to what it is that God has for you? Alright, you guys, so when we're dedicated to what it is that God has called us to do, the children of Israel, they were free. They were, headed to serve God in the wilderness, and God was going to give them their promised land. The promised land was promised to them when he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that was their land, and so he wanted to give them back the land after they had been in bondage, and we look at other times, if we continue to stay dedicated in our life, dedicated in our walk, whatever it is that we're going through, God will be able to restore things in our life if we are dedicated to what it is. We think of, this season has been a season of famine. A lot of people have been going through a season of famine, whether spiritual famine, whether, financial famine, whatever kind of famine, a lacking in their life. Maybe you feel some type of, God, you told me to do this, and things just don't seem like everything's adding up. But if you just hold on a little while longer, God will be able to restore to you what he has promised you, because he's God, and he's good, and he's merciful. You just have to continue on to trust him. The children of Israel knew that they belonged in the promised land, but they had to go through Egypt for a little while. They had to go through some things in Egypt for a little while after coming to Egypt with Joseph and Jacob and all that. So they had to go through that in their life, but God wanted to set them free. And so here we are in 2 Kings, and there's this woman, the Shunammite woman, and she was promised by Elisha, the prophet, that she would have a son in 2 Kings chapter 4. And so she ended up having a son, and her son died, and Gehazi, Elisha's servant, and Elisha raised him up from the dead. And then, a famine hit the land of Samaria, and so they had, to leave everything behind. And, in life, sometimes we have to leave everything behind and stay dedicated to the course in which God has for us, because we'll see that God had called for the famine in chapter 8. And it says, then Elisha spoke to the woman in 2 Kings chapter 8. And Elijah spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and furthermore it will come upon the land for 7 years. So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God, and she went with her household and dwelt in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 7 years that the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to make an appeal to the king for her house and for her land. And then the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, tell me, please, all the great things Elisha has done. Now it happened, as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead to life, that there was a woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son from Elisha, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed a certain officer for her, saying, restore all that was hers, and all the proceeds of the field, from the day that she left the land until now. See, this woman, in this time of famine, could have given up, but she stayed dedicated. She could have lost everything, that it was because, famine hit, and she had to leave everything behind, thinking that she was never going to see it ever again. But she stayed dedicated. Sometimes we have a course in life which God allows us to go through, and he has promised us something, but the way that we go seems long, and like we're never gonna see, maybe God has us, spy out the land. You think about Joshua and Caleb, and they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years with the other children of Israel, until those children of Israel died off and their children were raised up in the wilderness. You think about situations like that, how for 40 years they just kept hope in their mind, thinking one day we will see this promised land again, one day. But we have to continue to keep up hope, being able to see their promised land, and then having to wait 40 years to see it again. And so here we see that the woman just happened to be at the right place at the right time. See, when God is in it, everything will add up and everything will be restored to you, as long as you stay dedicated to what it is that God has called for you in your life. Like I said, it says, so the king appointed a certain officer for her, saying, restore all that was hers, and all the proceeds of the field, from the day that she left the land until now. So everything that she left behind, the king was going to restore back to her. So I just encourage you in your life, whatever it is that you're in your life, stay dedicated to the task in which God has called you to do, whether you're in a famine, whether you're leaving Egypt, or whether you're wandering in the wilderness and waiting for God, to restore you in your life. Make sure you stay dedicated to God and know that he will do what he said he will do. All right, you guys, I'm going to put up the last few questions, and then, thank you so much for tuning in. God bless. Peace. Are there things you have lost in this season, but you keep staying dedicated, having faith God will restore them back to you? If God never restores those things back to you, will you continue serving him? Your dedication will pay off, so stay encouraged and trust in the Lord. The Bible says in Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not onto your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all your ways, and he shall direct your path. Alright, hey everybody, welcome back. Once again, it's your girl Jasmine. So today we are going to continue on with our restoration series. So we've already talking about restoration when it comes to Hey everybody, welcome back. Once again, it's your girl. Alright, hey everybody, welcome back. Once again, it's your girl Jasmine. So today, we are going to start the series of restoration when it comes to dedication. Now, we've already talked about restoration when it comes to oh my gosh! Alright, hey everybody, welcome back. Once again, it's your girl Jasmine. So today, we are going to be talking about restoration and dedication, and we've already talked. Oh my gosh! Alright, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Remember to stay dedicated. Alright, God bless.